The Marines who landed at Guadalcanal in August 1942 were prepared to fight an enemy they could easily see. However, what they faced was a 3-month battle against invisible threats. Japanese snipers had transformed the jungle into a deadly battlefield where death came unexpectedly, often silently, and always from directions that were impossible to pinpoint. By February 1943, when the island was finally secured, the after-action reports from the Marines revealed a disturbing reality. A single well-placed sniper could cause more casualties than an entire enemy squad. The statistics were chilling. In November 1943, during the Battle of Bougainville, the 3rd Marine Division recorded an average of 15 combat deaths per day, all from sniper fire. This wasn't just the total number of casualties. These were 15 men killed, not wounded. Japanese snipers, using the Type 97 rifle with 6.5 mm rounds, were trained to aim for the head and upper chest. The wounds were so consistent that Marine medics could identify sniper kills without even examining the body. The concept of one shot, one kill was not just a motto. It was a brutal truth that made every movement through the jungle feel like a deadly gamble. The Japanese had developed a strategy that the Marines had never faced before in their training. Their snipers weren't hiding behind rocks or in foxholes where they could be suppressed with machine gun fire. They were 30 to 60 feet high in the coconut trees, camouflaged in foliage, invisible even when the Marines were looking directly at them. Some of these snipers had been in place for days, living on water and rice balls and defecating in bags to avoid detection. They covered key trails, water sources, and command posts and had a near supernatural level of patience. In December 1943, at Cape Gloucester, a single sniper pinned down a whole rifle platoon of 43 men for 7 hours. Every time someone moved, a bullet would either whiz by or hit the log they were hiding behind. The Marines fired thousands of rounds, called in mortar strikes, and even used a tank to try and destroy the suspected sniper's position. But nothing worked. The sniper would go silent for 20 minutes, leading the Marines to believe he had either been killed or moved. Then, when they least expected it, another Marine would fall. When the sniper was finally killed that afternoon by a lucky machine gun burst, it was discovered that he had fired only 18 rounds, but had killed 4 Marines and wounded 6 more. The psychological toll was even worse than the body count. Marines developed what medics called sniper neurosis, a constant hunched posture, and an inability to move normally because every instinct screamed that standing up meant certain death. Platoon leaders struggled to make tactical moves, and it became impossible to send runners between positions or set up effective defenses. One sniper had effectively reduced the combat effectiveness of an entire platoon. The Japanese were fully aware of this and had adapted their tactics accordingly. Their field manuals clearly outlined sniper operations as a force multiplier, emphasizing that a single skilled marksman was worth 10 regular infantrymen in jungle terrain. By mid-1943, the Marine Corps had a file 3 inches thick documenting Japanese sniper tactics, positions, and their devastating effectiveness. But the Marines had no solution. Standard counter-sniper tactics weren't working. The enemy had too much cover, too much patience, and too much ammunition to waste on suppressive fire. Something needed to change, and it did, thanks to a Nebraska carnival worker who had spent his entire life understanding one simple truth: people couldn't help but shoot at things that looked like targets. Sergeant William Eldridge wasn't expected to be the one to change Marine Corps tactics. He had spent 20 years running a shooting gallery at the Nebraska State Fair, watching people shoot at moving ducks, knowing exactly when they'd pull the trigger, and understanding that shooters always took the bait. Eldridge's platoon mates thought he was crazy, not dangerous, just carnival crazy, the kind of guy who analyzed human behavior like it was one big game. At Camp Pendleton, while others focused on fieldcraft and fire discipline, Eldridge kept muttering about trigger timing and visual commitment. His squad leader eventually told him to stop talking about the carnival unless he wanted to peel potatoes. Eldridge stayed quiet until the Battle of Bougainville in November 1943. On the third day of the campaign, Eldridge's company was trying to advance down a trail that a Japanese sniper had turned into a personal hunting ground. 6 Marines were down in just 90 minutes, but no one could pinpoint the shooter. Standard procedure was to call for artillery and suppress the area, but Eldridge was watching the bullet impacts, tracking the angles, and suddenly he didn't see a sniper anymore. Instead, he saw the same behavior he had studied his entire life. He saw the pattern that every shooter followed. He told his lieutenant he had an idea. The lieutenant told Eldridge to fall back in line, but Eldridge was insistent. He asked for a helmet, a stick, and 2 minutes. The lieutenant, exhausted and frustrated, gave him just 30 seconds to explain, warning him about insubordination. What Eldridge suggested seemed so absurd that 2 nearby riflemen started laughing. He proposed waving a helmet to make the sniper waste his bullets. The plan was simple. The sniper would shoot at the helmet, revealing his position, and the Marines would then take him out. The lieutenant's response was immediate and profane. You don't trick snipers. You suppress them with firepower or outflank them with maneuver. This isn't a carnival game. This is combat with real rules. Eldridge, however, didn't back down. He pointed out that they had already fired 3,000 rounds, called in mortar strikes, and lost 6 men by following standard tactics. His way would only cost 1 helmet and some ammunition, while the standard approach was costing lives. What ultimately changed the lieutenant's mind wasn't Eldridge's logic, but the sight of a young, wounded radio man who had been shot through the jaw while standing up for just 2 seconds. The lieutenant looked at the boy and then at Eldridge, saying 5 words that would resonate throughout the rest of the Pacific War. Fine, don't get yourself killed. Eldridge quickly grabbed his helmet, found a sturdy branch, and attached the helmet to the end. His squad thought he was about to commit suicide, and the other platoon believed it was some kind of mental breakdown. The company commander, watching from a distance, was sure he was about to witness the dumbest death of the campaign. No Marine on the trail thought Eldridge's plan would work. Eldridge crouched behind a fallen log, extended the helmet on a stick above the cover, and waved it slowly as if moving through the jungle. Within 2 seconds, a shot rang out, and the helmet jerked as the bullet punched clean through the steel. The Marines who had been preparing to ridicule Eldridge's stunt now paid close attention. The sniper had taken the bait, but the question was, why? And would he do it again? The Japanese sniper training at the Nano School emphasized immediate target engagement, known as Ichi Ichihatsu, meaning 1 shot, 1 target. The doctrine wasn't focused on conserving ammunition. It was about maintaining psychological dominance. A sniper who didn't shoot when a target presented itself was allowing the enemy to advance, which could lead to detection and ultimately death. The sniper's training emphasized that hesitation was failure, and when a target appeared, you shot immediately. The sniper's training ignored one key aspect, however, human visual perception. At combat distances, the human brain couldn't distinguish real targets from fake ones. When a helmet moved through the vegetation at a slow, steady pace around 2 miles per hour, the speed of a careful combat advance, the brain processed it as a threat. It took about 6 seconds for visual information to travel from the eye to the brain and trigger the reflex to fire. This was a purely trained response, one that didn't involve conscious thought. Eldridge, drawing from his carnival experience, understood that people couldn't resist shooting at targets that appeared to be real, even if they weren't. At the shooting gallery, he had seen countless people shoot at mechanical ducks moving on tracks. taken multiple shots even when they knew the ducks were fake. It wasn't about being tricked. It was about the neurological commitment to fire. Once the brain identified something as a target, the reflex to pull the trigger was nearly automatic. Eldridge waved the helmet again, this time from a different angle and height. The sniper shot again. The sniper, now caught in a behavioral loop, was locked into the pattern his training had hardwired into him. Every time the helmet appeared, the sniper shot. With each shot, the Marines grew more confident. A marksman, Corporal James Henshaw, tracked the sniper's position, triangulating his location 40 feet up in a coconut palm. After the fourth shot, Henshaw confirmed the position and took the shot. The silence after the shot was followed by laughter from the Marines, as the sniper who had pinned down an entire platoon for hours was finally silenced. The laughter that erupted among the Marines was a mix of disbelief and relief, the realization that something surprisingly simple had worked. Eldridge lowered his stick, examined the helmet with 2 neat bullet holes, and calmly remarked, "Told you, just like the ducks." Word spread quickly through the combat zone, especially when it involved a way to avoid dying. Within 48 hours, every rifle company in the division had heard about the Nebraska carnival sergeant who had turned sniper hunting into something almost comical. Some officers dismissed it as a lucky fluke, but others wanted to see it firsthand. The company commander, a captain from Virginia who had lost 11 men to snipers in 2 weeks, decided Eldridge would give a demonstration whether he wanted to or not. The opportunity came during the brutal Battle of Tarawa in November 1943, one of the bloodiest 76 hours of the Pacific War. The Marines hit the beaches on November 20th, expecting heavy resistance, but what they got was even worse: Japanese snipers, who had survived the naval bombardment and were systematically picking off anyone who thought they had secured an area. By the first day, the 2nd Marine Division's casualty report showed 38 confirmed sniper kills, making standard counter-sniper tactics look utterly ineffective. On the second day, Eldridge's squad was tasked with clearing a Japanese stronghold, a cluster of damaged bunkers where at least 3 snipers had established overlapping fields of fire. The usual assault tactics would have called for air support, likely resulting in the loss of a dozen Marines in the approach. But this time, their platoon leader, now a believer after Bougainville, gave Eldridge the green light to try his helmet trick with proper support. They set up 4 helmet stations at different points around the stronghold, each manned by a Marine with a stick, ready to become a target. The plan was coordinated: wave the helmets in sequence, create multiple targets, and force the snipers to reveal themselves through muzzle flashes and impact patterns. Behind each helmet operator, a Marine sniper with an .03 Springfield and a scope waited for a real target. The operation began at 0830 hours and turned into a masterclass in exploiting predictable behavior. The first helmet went up crack, a bullet, a flash spotted. The second helmet crack, different angle, second sniper identified. The third helmet crack, third sniper confirmed. The Japanese marksmen couldn't help themselves. Their training and doctrine dictated immediate target engagement. The Marines had just turned 3 lethal snipers into predictable, reflex-driven machines. Over the next 2 hours, those 4 helmets drew 47 separate shots from Japanese positions. Each time, the sniper shot at what he thought was a Marine head, but all he accomplished was revealing his location. The Marine counter-snipers kept track. The first sniper was eliminated at 0845, the second at 0920, and the third at 0953. Then things got interesting, as snipers from adjacent positions, attracted by the noise, joined in, thinking it was a target-rich environment. By 10:30 hours, Marine marksmen had confirmed 11 Japanese snipers killed, all lured by the decoys. all eliminated by snipers who would never have spotted them without the helmet trick. The cost to the Marines? 4 helmets with multiple holes, some sore arms from holding sticks for 2 hours, and 0 casualties, 0, in an operation that conventional doctrine predicted would cost at least 8 to 10 dead and twice as many wounded. Eldridge's tactic had achieved complete success without losing a single Marine. The battalion commander watched the final hour in silence, arms crossed, as his snipers picked off the Japanese marksmen one by one. When it was over, he asked Eldridge a simple question: "Can you teach this?" Eldridge could teach it, but what he really taught the Marine Corps was something the Japanese logistics officers had quietly feared since Guadalcanal ammunition arithmetic. Every Japanese sniper deployed to the Pacific carried 120 rounds in 6 stripper clips, each holding 20 rounds. It sounded like plenty until you realized it had to last for the entire duration of their deployment, which on fortified islands meant weeks or even months. Their supply doctrine assumed a maximum of 15 rounds expended per day, which gave them an 8-day supply if they conserved. The helmet trick could burn through 50 rounds in an afternoon. Marine intelligence first noticed the TMP ammunition issue in January 1944 when they overran a sniper position on New Britain and found a dead Japanese marksman with only 7 rounds left and a handwritten note in his ammunition pouch. A captured Korean laborer translated the note: 17 days, no resupply. Conserve ammunition or die useless. This note made its way up to division intelligence, and suddenly the Marines started doing the math. Japanese logistics in the Pacific were failing. Their supply lines were being torn apart by submarines, and isolated garrisons had no hope of resupply. A sniper who wasted 47 rounds on decoys wasn't just ineffective, he was out of the fight. Japanese sniper who began his deployment with 120 rounds was left with just 72 after 2 hours of firing at the Marines' helmet decoys. The Marines had drawn 48 rounds from him, 40% of his total ammunition, just by using helmets on sticks. The sniper was already behind his resupply schedule, and no help was coming. His commanders had expected him to use only 30 rounds in 2 days, not 48 in a couple of hours. With no resupply on the way due to the naval blockade, this sniper was now facing a critical shortage of ammunition. This scenario began to have a significant psychological impact on Japanese snipers. By February 1944, Marine forward observers began noticing that Japanese snipers were becoming hesitant, not in a tactical sense, but out of fear of running out of ammo. Snipers who once would have shot at obvious targets now held their fire, reluctant to use precious rounds. A patrol on Widow reported a sniper who allowed 7 Marines to walk past him before finally firing, missing his shot and quickly retreating. This was a complete violation of everything he'd been trained to do. After action reports from captured Japanese soldiers corroborated this shift in behavior, with several reports describing snipers who became ineffective after expending excessive ammunition. On Saipan, snipers abandoned positions after using up 70 rounds with minimal success. These weren't casualties. These were snipers who were still alive, but no longer able to fulfill their roles effectively. The helmet trick had turned their own logistics against them. Japanese doctrine assumed snipers would be firing at real targets, using their ammunition to achieve kills. But when 40% of their rounds were wasted on decoys, their entire tactical framework began to collapse. A sniper with only 20 rounds left was no longer a threat multiplier. He was essentially a regular rifleman with no meaningful ability to affect the battle. His role shifted from hunter to helpless witness as the Marines advanced, with no more rounds to make a difference. Marine casualty reports reflected this change. The number of confirmed sniper kills dropped significantly, from an average of 12 per day in late 1943 to just 7 per day by April 1944 in comparable island assaults. The Japanese snipers hadn't gotten worse at shooting, they had simply been deprived of their ammunition. What Eldridge had created was a way to weaponize scarcity, causing snipers to waste their limited resources and become ineffective. The Marine Corps, however, doesn't typically adopt tactics created by carnival workers, especially ones that sound like last-ditch desperation. Military institutions are based on doctrine, field manuals, and procedures developed by experts with prestigious credentials. But by January 1944, the casualty numbers from the Pacific were forcing uncomfortable realizations at headquarters. Traditional counter-sniper tactics weren't working. Eldridge's helmet trick was. When Marine Corps schools convened a working group on counter-sniper tactics in February 1944 at Camp Pendleton, they invited Eldridge, now a Bronze Star recipient, to demonstrate his technique to a group of skeptical officers. What they saw was a Nebraska sergeant waving a helmet on a stick while explaining sniper psychology in terms of carnival logic, none of which was in any field manual. Some officers found it embarrassing, but others saw the potential to save lives. The compromise was to officially adopt the tactic but rename it, calling it Decoy-Initiated Counter-Sniper Protocol instead of Eldridge's helmet trick. The training manual used formal military language, like expendable helmet mounted on a portable extension device instead of helmet on a stick, but the core idea remained unchanged. Present a realistic target silhouette, move it irregularly, and maintain concealment. This tactic quickly evolved as Marines began experimenting with Eldridge's concept. A corporal from Iowa added weight to the helmet so it bobbed more naturally. A private from Texas found that slowly dragging the helmet across an opening drew more shots than just waving it. A sergeant from Louisiana discovered that pausing the helmet for 3 seconds before suddenly moving it triggered snipers to fire reflexively at the motion. Within 2 months, rifle companies began developing their own variations, each refining the technique to exploit human visual responses and sniper psychology. By April 1944, the training program had become surprisingly sophisticated, with Marines adapting the helmet trick to fit the evolving realities of combat. Marine rifle companies in the Pacific Theater received a 2-hour block of instruction on helmet decoy operations, where they practiced using bamboo poles cut to precise 5-foot lengths. These poles were short enough to control but long enough to keep the helmet away from their heads. The Marines learned choreographed movement patterns such as slow waves, pauses, quick bobs, and diagonal sweeps. Instructors, many of them combat veterans, taught timing and rhythm as though they were teaching dance steps. The key was balance. Too predictable, and the snipers might catch on. Too erratic, and the decoy wouldn't trigger the sniper's reflex to fire. The goal was to mimic the natural movement of a Marine carefully advancing through hostile terrain. Some units added theatrical elements to make the decoys even more effective. They put lieutenant bars on some helmets to make them appear as priority targets, attached fabric strips to simulate camouflage covers fluttering in the wind, and one creative company even added fake radio antennas made from bent wire. Knowing Japanese doctrine prioritized killing communications personnel, the snipers kept shooting and the Marines kept counting the shots. By June 1944, what started as one sergeant's ridiculous idea had become standard operating procedure across the entire Marine Corps Pacific Command. Official after-action reports credited systematic doctrinal development, but every Marine who had used the tactic knew the truth. The real test of any tactic is whether it works consistently across different terrains, enemy units, and tactical situations. The helmet trick passed that test in every major island campaign from early 1944 to the end of the war. The data told a compelling story that even skeptics at headquarters couldn't ignore. Between Tarawa in November 1943 and Iwo Jima in February 1945, Marine casualties from sniper fire dropped by 38%, despite fighting in terrain that should have made sniping more effective. At Tarawa, the 2nd Marine Division recorded 114 confirmed sniper casualties over 76 hours, roughly 1.5 Marines killed or wounded per hour of combat. But by Saipan in June 1944, 7 months after the helmet decoy technique became standard, the same division, operating in comparable jungle terrain, recorded just 68 sniper casualties over 3 weeks. The raw numbers were similar, but when you factored in the operational tempo, Saipan involved 15 times more combat hours, and the per-hour sniper casualty rate dropped to just 0.04. Peleliu in September 1944 provided even more compelling evidence because the terrain was a sniper's dream: coral ridges, countless caves, elevation advantages, and firing positions covering multiple approaches. The Japanese had specifically selected sniper positions during months of defensive preparation, creating interlocking fields of fire that should have made Marine advances costly. Instead, after-action reports from the 1st Marine Division showed that helmet decoys continued to draw out Japanese snipers, who were then eliminated by counter-snipers. One rifle company logged 43 separate helmet decoy operations over 8 days, drew an estimated 300 Japanese shots, and suffered only 2 sniper casualties during that period. The Japanese knew what was happening, and captured documents from Saipan included a tactical memorandum dated July 2, 1944, from a Japanese infantry colonel to his remaining sniper teams. The memo was flagged as significant by a Marine translator working for Division Intelligence. It read, "Enemy employs false targets to waste ammunition and reveal positions. Sniper teams must exercise fire discipline and verify targets before engagement." It was a desperate attempt to counter the reflexive engagement that Japanese doctrine had drilled into their snipers. The problem was that verifying targets took time, and in combat, time can get you killed. A sniper who hesitated to verify a helmet as real or fake was a sniper who let actual Marines advance closer to his position. By Iwo Jima in February 1945, captured Japanese position maps told the final story. Marine intelligence recovered planning documents from a destroyed command bunker that showed sniper positions color-coded by ammunition status. Red positions indicated critical ammunition shortages. The map showed 43 sniper positions, 37 of which were marked red. The annotations referenced enemy deception, excessive ammunition expenditure, and no possibility of resupply. These positions had not been overrun or destroyed. They were still occupied by living Japanese snipers who had become tactically irrelevant because they had wasted too many rounds on helmets. The cumulative strategic impact was impossible to quantify precisely, but estimates suggested that if sniper casualty rates had remained at Tarawa levels through Iwo Jima, the Marine Corps would have suffered an additional 4,000 sniper-related casualties across the island campaigns. These 4,000 Marines were saved because of the helmet decoy tactic, which had turned a seemingly absurd idea into a game-changing method that crippled the effectiveness of Japanese snipers. Eldridge came home, not as a casualty of war, but as someone who had survived, largely because one carnival worker had understood something fundamental: shooters always take the bait. Eldridge made it through Okinawa in the spring of 1945, which statistically should not have happened. The 10th Army endured over 65,000 casualties during 82 days of intense fighting, making it the bloodiest campaign of the Pacific War. Eldridge's company faced 68% casualties, which meant he witnessed most of the men he'd trained and fought alongside either killed or evacuated. Despite this, he spent his final months of combat doing what he had since Bougainville, waving helmets on sticks, teaching new replacements the carnival tricks, and trying not to dwell on how something that seemed so simple to him had turned into revolutionary military doctrine. When the war ended in August 1945, Eldridge had a Bronze Star, 2 Purple Hearts from wounds he barely remembered, and a service record that acknowledged his innovative contributions to counter-sniper operations. He was processed out at Camp Pendleton in October, received his discharge papers, and took a bus back to Lincoln, Nebraska. His father picked him up at the station, asked how the war had been, and Eldridge gave the standard reply, "Fine, it was fine." Let's talk about something else. The shooting gallery was still there at the fairgrounds, with the same mechanical ducks on the same tracks and the same bell ringing when someone hit the target. Eldridge stepped back into running it, just like he had before. But now, he had a strange habit of watching people's trigger discipline and muttering about sight picture acquisition. The customers thought he was just getting particular about his carnival game. What they didn't know was that he had spent 3 years studying the same behavioral patterns, learning which ones got men killed and which ones kept them alive, depending on which side understood them better. In November 1945, Eldridge received his Bronze Star citation by mail, forwarded from Marine Corps headquarters. The citation credited him with exceptional ingenuity in developing counter-sniper techniques that had significantly reduced casualties across multiple campaigns. Eldridge read the citation once, put it in a drawer, and never mentioned it unless someone directly asked. When other veterans, who recognized his ribbon at VFW meetings, did ask, his explanation was always the same, just seemed like common sense. Shooters shoot at targets. We gave them fake targets. Not exactly rocket science, but it was in fact behavioral science, neurology, and tactical psychology wrapped up in carnival intuition. Eldridge never framed it that way, though, because he had learned everything by watching thousands of people try to win stuffed animals. He didn't know the academic terms for visual stimulus response or behavioral conditioning. He just knew that people, Japanese snipers included, couldn't help shooting at things that looked like what they were supposed to shoot at. And once you understood that, the rest was just execution. The Marine Corps continued to use the helmet, decoy tactics through the Korean War and into Vietnam, modifying them for different terrain and enemy doctrine. The basic principles remain the same. Exploit the opponent's training and reflexes, using cheap decoys that cost nothing but saved lives. Over the decades, various field manuals credited the technique to systematic doctrinal development in the Pacific Theater, but never mentioned that it came from a carnival worker who thought the whole thing was obvious. Eldridge ran the shooting gallery until his death in 1987 at age 71. His obituary in the Lincoln Journal-Star mentioned his Marine Corps service in one sentence, and spent 3 paragraphs talking about how he had been a fixture at the state fair for 50 years. Nobody mentioned that his carnival trick had saved thousands of lives. Nobody mentioned that he had turned Japanese sniper doctrine inside out using principles learned from watching people shoot at mechanical ducks. He probably would have preferred it that way. Common sense doesn't need monuments. It just needs to work.